From the many comments coming from China, I liked Lei, who named her podcast, meaning a realistic conversation. She doesn't represent any ideology or side, and I think she understands the intricacies of the Chinese Communist leadership's politics. Lei talked about what we have already been seeing and feeling lately with our own eyes, without knowing Chinese, without understanding the situation, and so on. About the fact that Xi Jinping is experiencing a certain decline in influence after his reckless escalation of the conflict with Trump. Well, let's go step by step.
For several months, there have been rumors and gossip that Xi Jinping has lost control of the party, giving it up to Zhang Yusei and the party elders. But this is not just a case of one faction prevailing over another. Even among the party elders themselves, there are competing priorities regarding what the next stage of China's development should be. Some want to save the regime from collapse. Others strive for political reforms. Some are focused on reviving the economy. And there are those who crave absolute power, simply for the sake of survival in this life and death struggle.
When it became clear that Xi was trying to bluff with an empty hand, and he was trying to do this not with Biden, Bush, Obama, or Carter, but with Trump, it was clear that he either overstayed his welcome or was never smart in the first place. Well, I mean, of course it's clear. He's cunning, he's lucky, he's smart in the sense that he knows how to weave intrigues inside within the party. But the kind of intelligence that's absolutely necessary to tell a grass snake from a cobra, which any explosive politician, a head of state, should definitely have. In my opinion, he didn't have that. I think the Politburo of the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party suddenly realized this. But even after realizing that Trump doesn't fall for bluffs, doesn't fall for bravado, and that this bluff works against China, in order to save their own skin, and not the ruling elite, not the ruling party, not the system they're all supposedly interested in, just their own skin, he rushed to Russia, then relied on Iran, then allowed North Korea to send troops to Ukraine. That is, he did everything as if he could really form a coalition against the United States of America and win. But when India and Vietnam broke away from China, comrades realized it was time to quietly remove Xi from power. But they have to do it very carefully so as not to completely ruin the already wounded economy under Xi.
For several weeks, the political center in Beijing seemed paralyzed. Xi Jinping disappeared and then began to resist change. Zhang Yusei, relying on military power, demanded changes, while the party elders found themselves caught in the middle trying to maintain a fragile balance. All signs and rumors pointing to Xi Jinping's loss of power reached a new stage yesterday when Xi Jinping himself made a statement on behalf of the party. In fact, he confirmed his own decline.
We're talking about the expanded Politburo meeting, where all the underlying forces of China were present, all the chairmanships, but he was not in charge. Yes, one more thing. Last month, there were no publications about the May monthly Politburo meeting taking place, which caused complete astonishment. And most importantly, several speeches of an almost seditious nature were leaked. At this meeting, there was no report, and as if the meeting itself never happened. So there was this stunned feeling in Chinese society that something was happening, but no one really understood what. So it turns out that this meeting took place in May, and it was the May meeting that laid the foundation for what is happening now. What am I going to tell you about? What has now turned into, so to speak, a monthly Politburo meeting, the so-called June meeting, the information about which we only received in July. Let's take a look further.
This marks a major milestone. This marks an important milestone. The deadlock at the top of the Communist Party has officially been broken, and Xi Jinping lost to Zhang Yuxia in the final round. Now the CCP did not announce its monthly Politburo meeting in May, which sparked a wave of speculation. Then rumors emerged that a secret expanded Politburo meeting did take place, and even some speeches by participants were leaked. When June arrived, people began to wonder if there would be a Politburo meeting at all this month. Because skipping another meeting would mean that something had gone terribly wrong. Then, just in time, on the last day of the month, the official report on the June Politburo meeting was published. Yesterday, Xinhua published this bulletin.
This means it's a summary of what happened at this rather unusual meeting of China's Politburo. So what happened? It was apparently created in May, and now it's kind of official. A party management committee instead of the general secretary, meaning Xi, in fact, not even instead of him, but above him. Xi is turning into an executor of the committee's orders. Xi no longer controls the army, internal forces, or any of the security agencies at all. And before that, a couple of generals disappeared. I talked about this, but how should I put it? Not knowing Chinese internal politics, I didn't give it much importance. I just thought they were having some kind of internal gathering over there. It turns out that several generals close to Xi, who were considered his support in the army, suddenly disappeared. Xi can't start anything new. He can't make new decisions either in domestic or foreign policy. He remained in his position, but without the functions that are actually the duties of a head of state.
First of all, the main point of the announcement is to declare the creation of this central party body for decision-making and coordination. This body essentially takes on the very role that Xi Jinping previously played in decision-making. And this means that Xi is no longer the highest authority in the Communist Party of China. Now he has a boss, and that boss is this new decision-making body. So, the first important point we need to highlight from yesterday's announcement is that Xi Jinping, the General Secretary of the party, is no longer the highest authority. Now they are managed by this new decision-making and coordination body or group. And the fact that the role of this new body in implementing major initiatives, strategic planning, and coordination is repeatedly emphasized shows just how extensive its power really is. Now think about that. The fact that these provisions are being introduced now suggests that this body was not created yesterday. It has already been operating in secret for some time. But working at the highest level of power in secret comes with risks. That's why the leadership now needs to institutionalize it in order to normalize and publicly acknowledge its existence as soon as possible. By doing this, they solidify the new power structure and make it much harder to reverse.
What does it mean to be harder to reverse? That's an interesting question. It makes you think. And that's in case Xi starts a rebellion with massacres, arrests, and executions, which of course has happened in China, and not only in China, both in old China and in modern China, it has happened. The Politburo, fearing that Xi might organize a coup, announced that if he starts giving any orders, those are not party orders, but orders against the party.
This announcement could trigger a chain reaction of sensitive events. How? Think about it. The reaction of local officials and the public to this remains unpredictable. We will need to closely monitor the situation. I want to say if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. I will continue to provide you with timely analysis and insights about the upcoming regime changes.
If you understand English, I highly recommend subscribing to Lei. Her audience is growing well and people trust her, especially Chinese people, it seems. But I'm also interested in something else. How does Xi's removal affect or will affect relations with the United States and the alliance with Russia and Iran? Of course, it depends on who joined this committee, meaning whose faction won. To maintain balance, they sometimes include someone from your faction and someone from mine. The main thing is to hold on, because China is falling apart. It's just collapsing under our feet.
Is to hold the base.
Our economy from being destroyed. So basically, if what happened in SI is a reaction to his behavior with Trump, and there don't seem to be any other reasons for it as of today. That's everything that's happening today. This is happening practically because of Xi's reaction to Trump. This means that they are afraid of such a direct confrontation with the United States. When he said, if you buy oil from Russia, we will raise all your tariffs by 500%. What I was talking about, that Trump literally said yesterday or the day before, it's being written, it's being done. We will pass this bill and it will be on my desk because it is completely in my hands. If I want, I sign it and act. If I don't want to, I don't act. In other words, the threat had its power. This means a significant reduction in tariffs on goods from the United States and a significant expansion of the range of goods that are allowed to be imported into China. Also, the cancellation of mandatory know-how disclosure, which previously deterred some of our manufacturers from going there. Regarding Russia, Iran, and North Korea, and by the way, Israel has banned selling them the invention. Regarding Russia, Iran, and North Korea, I don't think anything will change drastically, but the presence of Donald Trump will be taken into account in any decisions. Trump collapsed, remaining like a Matryoshka doll on the boss. How much Trump will be able to reorganize China, we will see, but Trump doesn't intend to reorganize or remake it. It's not his job. Not China, not Iran, not Russia, not Syria, not North Korea. He just wants honesty and openness in trade. And look at how powerful honesty and openness turned out to be as weapons. I assure you there will be news soon. Not always good, you could say, well, like right now. Right now, it's wonderful from my point of view, although we don't know what will happen next. But always provoking the status quo, always provoking the status quo under Trump. Of course, without a doubt, the current administration is different from anything that has ever been in the United States before. To the question, and how are you, your Lilia, different from those who sat in the White House before you? Our president, without a moment's hesitation, said, before me, none of the previous occupants of the Oval Office understood anything about numbers. Well, I'll add my own opinion, absolutely nothing. Listen to his interviews and speeches from the 80s and 90s, and you'll hear the same themes, the same warnings, the same ideas that he's putting into practice now. And of course, each of us should ask, what is so important and interesting for me in this law? I'm often asked, what's in there that makes the left so sure that life ends with the new law coming in, while the right says it's the best thing ever? After the invention of the synchrophasitron, which was invented by humans, and I think you should judge for yourself. Here's what is written there for you and for me.
First, overtime is no longer taxed up to certain amounts. If you file your tax return as a single person, the first $12,500 are no longer taxed. If you file jointly, the first $25,000 are no longer taxed. The same applies to tips. Your first $250 in tips are no longer taxed.
Let me explain. If you earned, let's say, $100,000 in a year, just for simplicity, the federal government will take about 30% from you. I'll round everything, so let's say $30,000. Very roughly, just for the sake of simplicity. Plus, of course, they steal from you with taxes, they rob you. A more accurate word, of course, is city and state, and even the so-called county, which we call county. And in general, everyone who feels like it organizes something, even tries to organize 20, 30, 40 houses into some kind of social structure and also steals. Do you have any mandatory payments? Well, that's why we sold our first and best house, because the neighbors decided to unite as soon as I heard they were planning to unite. I told my wife we need to get out of here, so we left. So, the federal law? That's what we're going to talk about. The federal central law. You get $100,000. After the robbery, you get $70,000. Why? But that's the money you earned, right? Well, all right. But if they told you that you got $12,500 for overtime, well, that's included in that $100,000, right? Plus. Let's calculate for a single person. Assume you receive $12,500 for overtime and $25,000 in regular pay. For example, in tips. I understand this doesn't apply to most people, I'm just trying to explain the principle. Otherwise, now your taxes will be taken not from $100,000 but from a smaller amount. Why? Will they deduct it from you? They'll deduct $12,525 from $100,000. It's not like they'll just take it away, they'll subtract it. And you'll have $62,500 left. Now taxes will be taken from $62,500 instead of $100,000. 30% of that amount is approximately $20,000. So does that mean that now you'll be robbed not of $30,000 but only $20,000? You should be thrilled. I'm always happy anyway. They're robbing us a bit less. Great. What does that mean? A person who earns $100,000 and has these, what we call tax deductions, will be able to keep more in their pocket. So, well, that means he will be getting not 70, but 80, and accordingly he will have $10,000 more left in his pocket. I hope things became clearer for you after my confusing explanation.
The child care tax deduction has increased to $2,500. Next, the interest you pay on your car loan can finally be deducted from your taxable income. But there is a caveat. It has to be a car that was finally assembled in America. If you buy such a car, now you can deduct up to 10% of the loan interest. Again, more money stays in your pocket.
That is, buy a car made in the United States of America. Well, maybe some parts, but I'm sure it'll be 70 to 80%. In the United States of America, then it's considered made in the United States of America. And you'll be able to write off another $10,000 from your taxes. Another $10,000 from your taxes. So now you'll be paying not $62,500 but minus $52,500, and 30% of that is even less. This is very, 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 very approximate. Well, basically, I'm kind of explaining. This is what allows you to write off taxes. Also, when you buy an American car, it encourages Americans to buy things made here. Well, that means it will encourage auto conglomerates to manufacture in the United States, yes, even if it's more expensive than producing in Mexico, Canada, or Southeast Asia. Manufacturers will save on shipping, tariffs, and import duties. And United States citizens will also be looking for which car is made here, at least 70% of it here. This one, I want to buy it. This one is only 60% made here. I don't want to buy it because now I won't get a tax discount for it. But if I buy a car like that, I get a tax discount. And in the United States, American citizens will choose cars made here. And it's clear why all the global manufacturers have already rushed to look for places to expand, to build, to produce. These are huge manufacturing facilities. But not only are they massive, they also employ a lot of people. And there are also a huge number of subcontractors involved, people who support this large-scale production. There are 3 to 4 times more people supporting those who actually work there. Even those who cook food for them, sell them food, socks, handkerchiefs, provide services, and so on. Now all of this will be made in America, not somewhere else, and sold to us. Hand over your money, we'll take it to our workers. No, now this will happen here, with us. Well, all right. So most of these companies have either already started building something here or are ready to start soon. Here's another interesting thing. And most of these companies are looking for and will continue to look for locations in Republican states. The Republican-run ones, right? It's not about ideology at all. They couldn't care less about that. The answer is obvious. That's all. And here's how it works. You come to a Democratic state, and you can only hire union members there. Why? Because in our state, we don't have the right to work law. What do you mean we don't? That's just how it is. But in Republican states, they've adopted the right to work law. In America, they specifically passed laws granting the right to work to anyone. You're a union member, or you're a mafia member, you're a member of this, or you're not a member at all. You have the right to work because you live in America. When you live in Republican states, you live in America. In Democratic ones, not quite. All right, let's move on. So, in summary, the Republican states will develop, more and more people will move there. They will leave the Democratic states and go where there is work.
The standard tax deduction for married couples has increased from $29,200 to $31,500, which means you can write off more with the standard deduction, and you don't need to itemize every expense separately. Next is the state and local tax limit. Alright, these are your state and local taxes. Now you'll be able to write off up to 40 of your state and local taxes. And finally, bonus depreciation has increased back to 100%, which is very important for investors. We've listed just a few of them, but an ordinary person, if you work overtime, get tips, live in a high-tax state, you can save $30,000, $40,000, even $50,000 on taxes if you apply these tax provisions to your situation.
There are many aspects to the law, and we'll talk about other sides of the law tomorrow. Well, tomorrow or the day after. In the meantime, think about how you can minimize your own taxes, because right now you have a huge number of new opportunities opening up for you. That is, to keep as much money in your own pocket as possible. More money is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. No matter what the Democratic Socialists tell you, let's rob, that's bad. Or rather, let's rob, that's stupid. And whether it's bad or good, you decide for yourself. God forbid, I'm not urging anyone to break the laws of the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, that's also stupid. Very. First of all, you'll get fined right away, and then you might even get jailed for it. And I urge you to be smart, specifically to look for ways within the law not to let yourself be robbed, or to let yourself be robbed as little as possible. That's smart. In my opinion, that's wonderful. Don't let yourself be robbed, or let yourself be robbed as little as possible, and then look, even less, even less, even less. And eventually they'll stop robbing you altogether. The traditional values of the Democratic Party have become a laughingstock among those we now call leftists. The Democrats have allowed communists into their ranks. I hope they'll bring you energy, bring in young people, but the rot has eaten their party from the inside. The fact that the party once represented the interests of American wage workers and all those who needed help, that's kind of a good thing. There should be, for example, one party, in our case, so to speak, the Republican Party, that represented the interests of the manufacturers. Those people who drive progress forward, and those who need protection, who need help. Everything is fine, everything is good, it is transformed, it has become something completely different. And now the Republican Party has come to represent the interests of both those who provide jobs and those who receive them. It turned out, as we always said, that they have the same tasks, problems, and so on. Because a labor union is not a positive but a negative phenomenon. But I'll talk about this separately sometime because you just won't believe me otherwise. I need to talk about this with numbers, facts, and persuasion. Today, the Democratic Party sets its goals as follows: to rob, to take away, to divide, to hate, and to make things up. Things that, in a normal state, in what you might call a cold working mind, would be impossible to even imagine. This is so obvious and so noticeable from afar that I even found some Australians who were stunned and talked about it.
Next up, the left is losing their composure. And we'll start with the bluest of blue cities, San Francisco, a city so neglected that a newspaper is asking the question, why is San Francisco covered in human feces? That headline is real and true, folks. And today in San Francisco, the ultra-leftists were not just ignoring the epidemic of human waste, they were attacking immigration and customs enforcement agents who were simply doing their jobs.
Don't think that San Francisco isn't crap is just a figure of speech. The police don't have the right to stop a citizen, whether male or female, who, let's say, sits down in Central Park or just on the street to relieve themselves. I think that's called yes. So the police officer doesn't have the right, because the streets belong to everyone. And you remember, back from the Soviet Union, as soon as something belongs to everyone, it actually belongs to no one, except for those who want to mess it up. Or you can't stop a person who walks into a store and takes whatever he likes from the shelf. Whatever he likes. Maybe he likes bread, or maybe a gold ornament if it costs less than $950. The price increased from $900 to $950 due to inflation. Here they immediately raise it to $950 in Los Angeles and San Francisco. So is this not stealing? Then what is it, you might ask? Stealing is taking someone's property without permission. This situation is different. Stealing is when you take something because you're white? Not because you're white, but you're white and you take something. And if you're not white, then it means you were oppressed. I don't even know how to translate that. There are people of various races and ethnicities, including white, black, Mexican, and others, who are wealthy. Or was there something like that in your childhood? Crazy, completely justifying any so-called petty crime? Well, that's an interesting thing. When you're easily allowed to commit petty crimes, then you don't really understand which crimes are petty and which ones are, well, a little less petty.
So much squealing. Let's stay in California. Here's a woman with blue hair in San Diego who is laying her hands on a police officer. Not recommended. This happened during a protest against the arrest of an undocumented immigrant from Guatemala who allegedly crashed his car. Government vehicle.
Representative at the moment when I hear government vehicle.
But lady, you can't do that. You know, these people live in denial of democracy. There was an election, Donald Trump won with these very politicians. He has a clear mandate to deport every illegal immigrant. And
what do the so-called leftists say about this?
about this statement?
I'm saying that if you commit a crime while on United States territory, you should be handed over to. And I think it's a simple deal. That's exactly what people voted for in November. And then you would have a much stronger argument against the abuses we're seeing now, which don't reflect what the American people want. People didn't vote for someone to be caught in immigration courts. People didn't vote for that. According to Keith's new data, 65% of people detained by immigration and customs enforcement had no criminal record.
Interesting concept. If you broke the law by crossing the border, if you worked illegally in the United States, lived illegally, or drove a car illegally, then that is not a reason to consider you a lawbreaker. What is a criminal? A person who broke the law, a breaker, a lawbreaker, so such a person is not a criminal. The project shouldn't be expelled from the country. What? But we didn't study logic at universities. We studied the struggle of African women in the 16th century for, well or against, it doesn't matter what and what they fought for, because they didn't fight against anything and they didn't fight for anything. They just didn't know that they could fight.
What? That's precisely what they voted for. That's exactly what they voted for. Now we're just passing off wishful thinking as analysis. Jessica, I don't know what parallel universe you were living in, but Donald Trump ran for office with a policy of deporting all illegal immigrants and won by a huge margin. And since then, the polls have been clear. The majority of Americans, including most legal immigrants, support Trump's deportation plan. Let's turn to this analysis. The reality for Jessica.
Deport all immigrants who are here illegally. 55%, 64%, 57%. When the question is phrased differently, 56%. What you see here is a clear indication that most Americans, when asked a direct question that reflects their true feelings, really do want to deport all immigrants who are here illegally. You can't argue with these different numbers because they're essentially the same across 4 different polling agencies.
You probably think I exaggerated a bit about what is being threatened and what is being taught in schools and colleges in the United States. How about meeting the head of the Education Workers Union for the entire United States? Betty Kringle. If she's from South Africa, she's Kringle in the sense of South Africa. They all came from there, not Boers, right? So Betty Kringle?
Hold on until we get there. Get up, Neep. Hold on. Please hold on tight to everyone's hand.
Do you have any doubts that our children are in safe hands? Do you think she's the only one like that? One of her predecessors, when asked, "Why are you against our children?" she answered from the podium, "When children start paying my salary, I'll be for them." But that's true. You can Google it and find it. Well, maybe we took Betty's speech out of context. Well, let's listen a little further.
Not a chance. You will not take money from our public schools. Never in any election or in all elections combined. We will stand.
Of course, this makes a lot of sense and is more worthy of our teachers. The teachers have elected a good president. Tell me who your president is, and I'll tell you which hospital you should go to. And here is another great Democrat, here she is, who lost the election for governor of the state of Georgia. But she believes she wasn't elected because of 2 things, her gender and her skin color. Stacey Abrams.
You send Marines to places in the United States where they don't belong, deploy the National Guard, kidnap people right off the streets, and pretend that it's normal. Because that's how you suppress dissent. Because you make everyone afraid that if they don't do what you want, they could be next. And when you've gone through those 9 steps, the 10th step becomes easy. That's when you decide against new elections, as everyone is scared, poor, broken, or implicated.
That means Trump is preparing to kill democracy in the United States. She got it wrong. Trump mortally wounded the Democratic Party, not democracy. And what exactly did this party offer us in terms of democracy?
Actually has a long and in some ways inglorious history of opposing democracy. At one time, the Democratic Party was the party of slavery. At one time, the Democratic Party was the party that tried to disenfranchise Black Americans in the Jim Crow South. So it's ironic, but the Democratic Party has a very contradictory history when it comes to democracy. This is basically just the latest manifestation of that. By the way, it's just so ironic. It's pure hypocrisy. Isn't it true that American leftists endlessly and still keep talking about Donald Trump and the 2020 election? He can't let go of that election. Stacey Abrams, one of the first election deniers who didn't accept the results of the 2018 gubernatorial election, was Hillary Clinton. In the initial days following the 2016 election, she also rejected the outcome. So Democrats, Dita, they're not only basically trying to undermine democracy, but when democracy doesn't go their way, they also often get outraged and shout about injustice. But Stacey Abrams, at this point, well, it would be best for her to just leave politics. Her electorate has become insignificant, making her an inconsequential figure. If I were in her place, I would just settle in a nice house or on a beautiful farm, leave public life, and enjoy the rest. Because, to be honest, girl, you're not really doing well in politics.
Well, that's a great short explanation of who they are, where they're from, and the nonsense they're spouting as a contrast. Listen to our vice president, who in 2028 will obviously be running for the presidency. Will you see the difference in approach and conclusions?
I used to find comfort in the contradictions within the modern leftist movement. How can privileged white people march with a serious face and condemn white privilege? How can progressives pretend to love conservative Muslims despite their views on gender and sexuality? But the answer is obvious if you think about it, and it's a very, very dangerous and very sad answer. Radicals on the far left don't need a unifying ideology for what they stand for, because they know very well what they're against. What unites Islamists, gender studies students, socially liberal white urbanites, and big pharmaceutical company lobbyists is not the ideas of Thomas Jefferson or even Karl Marx. It's hatred. They hate the people in this room. They hate the President of the United States. And most of all, they hate the people who voted for this president in the last election in November. This is the driving principle of the American far left.
I would say not only to hate, but also to envy. Perhaps envy is the strongest feeling. By the way, Stacey Abrams' organization, which didn't win and is afraid that they won't be able to achieve democracy from this, she received a small sum of $2 billion from Biden literally on his last day in the White House. I also don't want to talk nonsense. Repeating the nonsense they wrote. Yes, by the way, this organization, Power Forward had $2,100,000 in its account on the day it was received. That is, it had never done anything before, but that's okay. It had never done anything to anyone, and it received $2 billion in its account.
Actually, I'm thinking of a name you don't often hear now, Minda Mansour. Minda Mansour was that Muslim girl who was the leader of the Women's March against
Donald Trump
at the beginning of Trump's presidency. Now Linda Mansour has deleted many of her old tweets, but she still has a very strange old tweet from around 2011 or 2012 where she praises Sharia law regarding credit card interest rates or something like that. And, let's think about what Sharia law says about, well, I don't know, the Women's March, about feminism, about women in general. I'm not sure you want to go there, right? But ultimately, that's the whole idea of what some call the Red-Green alliance between Marxists, between communists, and radical Islamists. Sakan in Amdan in New York is actually essentially the sole embodiment of this Red-Green alliance. And JC Sense is absolutely right. What unites them is a deep absolute pervasive contempt for Western civilization, for the Jews and Christians who built Western civilization, for everything we call the West today. They despise it and seek to destroy everything. That's what the left has been doing, at least since Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. This mindset may trace back to the French Revolution and the Jacobins, but today they are consumed by spiteful envy, resentment, and hatred.
Well, there's the word envy. It unites Islamists, fascists, communists, democratic socialists, and everyone else, really all collectivists, all consuming envy. To success, to our ability to enjoy life, to our optimism, to our ability to see what they would call a half-empty glass as a wonderful glass with something in it. Be it water, whiskey, champagne with its sparkling drops. And probably most importantly, they envy and hate us because we know how to overcome difficulties. As Alfred Tennyson wrote in his brilliant Ulysses in Mendel's classic translation, it is to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. By the way, in another translation, the absolutely magnificent one by Beaumont, it sounds different, but it's also really great. But we are who we are. Such a typical Beaumont block and so on, and Scythian in us. But we are who we are. The tempering of fearless hearts, weakened by both time and fate, but with an undiminished will for the strong. To seek, to find, to dare, not to retreat. Gentlemen, this isn't about collectivists, this is about us. This is about those who built America, those who are now trying to bring it back to its roots. This is about us. To seek, to find, to dare, not to give up. Such wonderful words. Well, Mendel did great, and Ballman did great too. But let's get back to the brainwashing of our children by those very teachers who elected Betty as the president of the Education Workers Union. She is more like a worker of the brainwashing union.
The indoctrination we see in schools harms children, hinders their academic progress, and fills their heads with extreme left-wing ideology, instead of, say, facts, figures, and any sense of critical thinking. Teachers' unions support this political activism. Let's listen to an educator who was named Teacher of the Year 2025 by the Teachers' Union. This teacher considers her role essentially political.
When I realized how deeply politicized our profession has always been, I understood that I could no longer stay on the sidelines. That's why I got involved in the process, found like-minded people, and they helped me find my voice.
And here are a few more activist-minded teachers who are discussing how to start preventing political indoctrination earlier. Don't wait for higher education, don't wait for universities, start much earlier.
I left higher education and now I work in a high school. So everyone who raised their hand and said you were radicalized in college, imagine if you had been radicalized 4 years earlier. We need to organize undergraduate students to join the struggle because we are both students and workers. And right now, I just want to say, because I think there are a lot of people here from higher education, work with schools, build connections with teachers' unions.
They say teaching is an ideological profession, an ideological profession. She should be fired right away, just for saying those words. And also, propagandists from universities should connect with the teachers' union and teach us how to do propaganda, so that by the time we get to college in 4 years, they gathered for a congress called the Socialist. Something like that, or Socialist 2025, that's what I think it was called. About 36.
About 36% of students reported that their teachers often or almost daily claimed that America is, by its very nature, a racist nation. So that's pretty crazy. You see this not only in higher education institutions, but also at the K-12 school level. I think it actually starts in the public school system, and students carry that same ideology with them to college. And there was this woman, Tina, whom you just showed from the Socialism 2025 conference. They openly say that they want to use the school system to indoctrinate children with far-left ideology. It's time to introduce school choice so that families can look for alternatives that match their values.
We know this very well. Anyone who has children or grandchildren knows this all too well. But let's take another look at Betty.
It all ends with us. Stay.
Hold on. Don't let go of either hand. Hold on.
Just wanted to remind you who and how your children are being taught.
The conformity they impose, and they brainwash the children. There are about 50 million children in the American public school system, and they have enormous power over these children. These are young, impressionable minds, and this really should concern parents.
That's a good conclusion to our conversation about Islamists and liberals who differ only in how many times a day they pray to their God, the great God of envy and hatred. Don't you think it's time to completely eliminate state educational institutions, all these schools, and make all these schools private, at least at the initial stage? Give parents so-called vouchers, that is, a document, a government commitment to pay for their children's education at any school of their choice. If you choose this school, attend it. Let them chase after us. Let them compete. Let them say, I'm better, I'll do this. All right. And then just do everything possible to make schools truly private, like stores, like movie theaters, like service organizations. Gentlemen, we won't destroy anything. We'll just build something much better next to it. I want to show you what modern warfare is and how technology changes the focus of battle. Today we'll discuss drones.
Russian troops took up a favorable observation point and began searching for targets to strike. At that time, a small group of Ukrainians was carrying out an evacuation nearby. They tried to quickly collect the equipment to move to a safer place, but this time they couldn't remain unnoticed. A group of Russian mortarmen spotted the Ukrainian unit and immediately began shelling their position. The shell didn't hit the vehicle, but it managed to ignite the ammunition depot that the Ukrainian soldiers had come for. The Russians managed to wound one of the Ukrainian soldiers, but it's hard to call that a success. That's why they quickly reload the mortars and try to finish off the target. But the Ukrainians aren't just sitting idle. Part of the team that stayed in cover quickly uses a drone to spot Russian positions, intending to strike back while the enemy is distracted. On the way to the mortar crew, the reconnaissance unit spots another very tempting target. The Russians assumed they were at a safe distance from the front line and set up a small mortar shell depot to supply their comrades. The mortar crew was confident in their safety, so they kept firing actively, not suspecting that very soon they might lose that opportunity. Meanwhile, Ukrainian drone operators were already preparing their
response.
While the Ukrainians were preparing and launching their first-person view drones, the Russians, suspecting nothing, gathered all their ammunition in one place, not knowing that they were being closely watched and that a target was calmly being set for the approaching. If it weren't for the reconnaissance team, the first-person view drone pilot would have never noticed this field depot of ammunition. But thanks to precise targeting, the drone operator now has a good chance to destroy not only mortar shells, but also the stockpile of anti-tank mines that the Russians have generously placed. Here...
I'm showing you a video made by My Global Issues. They have about 230,000 subscribers. They showed us how Ukrainians used drones to take out several armored vehicles and a tank, found an ammunition depot and destroyed it, detected reinforcements on the way and stopped them. And all of this was done with just a few cheap drones.
The crew of this armored personnel carrier realized halfway through that things could end badly, and even tried to turn around and retreat. But this time it only made things worse. Aaron hit the vulnerable spot directly. Russians are increasingly avoiding advancing in large formations, preferring to split into small groups. And although equipment is often destroyed even on the approach, sometimes this tactic still brings results. This Russian armored vehicle managed to get very close to the Ukrainian positions and began to lay down suppressive fire. The trees block the view and the Russians can't see the enemy, so they fire blindly, hoping to hit someone. The Ukrainian soldiers who didn't have time to retreat to other fortifications seem to understand this and are trying to quietly leave their position so they don't get trapped. The crew of the Russian armored vehicle decides to change
their position,
believing that there's nothing more for them here to do. Meanwhile, Ukrainian soldiers safely leave the area and report to their commander that enemy armored vehicles were spotted in their sector. The reconnaissance drone has locked onto the target and is closely tracking the movement of the Russian vehicle. Not far from the road, the Russians spot a partially destroyed hangar and decide that it's the best place for temporary cover. This really could have been good cover that might have saved the Russians, but this time they weren't lucky. A nearby Ukrainian brigade specializing in such complex operations had already prepared a drone with fiber optic control. From the high-quality video feed, it's immediately clear that this is not an ordinary first-person view drone. Since the hangar walls no longer interfere with the signal, the operator has the time and opportunity to aim very carefully before striking. The strike. The pilot moves slowly to avoid damaging the cable connecting him to the drone. Kamikaze, he circles around the armored vehicle from the side and notices that the Russians left the hatch open. You can't find a better target, and the pilot
easily flies inside. Additional reconnaissance
reports that the vehicle has been destroyed.
And the second flight is not
required. But a few minutes later, they spot another armored vehicle moving
through the village.
The village is almost completely destroyed, and now there's a chance to stop the vehicle before the Russians have time to find cover. Ukrainian drone operators are preparing the next wave, this time using regular first-person view drones, and getting ready for the hunt. With a little bit of luck, they'll be able to stop
the Russians before they leave the village.
The drone operator turns around and flies directly toward the armored vehicle. Knowing the direction of the Russian BUTS, the drone operator turns around and flies straight
toward the armored vehicle.
The first strike was enough to hit and stop it, but the job isn't finished yet. The crew has likely already exited the vehicle.
But that doesn't mean
that they won't try to come back later to repair or evacuate it. The armored vehicle appears to be mostly intact, so the next drone should inflict as much damage as possible.
Damage.
And now the pilot has an advantage. The target is stationary, which means there's an opportunity for a precise strike, and he succeeds.
The first explosion ignites the vehicle.
The fire reaches the ammunition supply. And after a few minutes, the fire reaches the ammunition.
The Russians have more equipment to launch missiles. They have more missiles, they have more tanks, they have more planes. They have more of everything in general. That's what gave them the advantage. Modern partisans, also called guerrilla tactics, so to speak, are actions that are inexpensive, targeted, but very disruptive to the advancing army, and their name today is drones. Instead of explosives on bridges and rails, there is a small flying machine capable of disabling, let's say, both a large oil ship and a tank, a bunker, a truck and ammunition shed, and a train carrying fuel for the army.
Every time Ukrainian intelligence manages to detect their activity, all possible efforts are immediately focused on destroying the target. The first detected launcher had already fired a salvo and was preparing to leave its position. The Ukrainian first-person view drone pilot managed to catch up with it almost halfway through its retreat. These multiple launch rocket system launchers are extremely vulnerable and have almost no protection against a direct hit. That's why this time, one drone was enough to create a real fireworks show.
During
such operations, mobile first-person view teams have to act extremely quickly. As soon as reconnaissance confirms the target, there is practically no time left to think. The teams need to reach the launch position and get the drones in the air before the Russians move out of effective range.
That's precisely what General Zaluzhin, now an ambassador, was referring to. The tactics of combat and warfare in general during the war in Ukraine have changed dramatically. They've changed because of artificial intelligence, satellites, and drones. By the way, the Israelis introduced a new anti-drone system yesterday, which I think was invented by 2 Israeli school students. Drones are detected almost instantly as soon as they take off. It is determined whether it's friendly or hostile. The frequency it communicates on is identified, and within 1/10,000th of a second, the coordinates of the person controlling it are found. So this tactic will also change over time, especially since Russia is sending North Koreans to the Ukrainian front.
The involvement of North Korean troops in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has been confirmed by numerous videos. Intelligence sources have repeatedly stated that in addition to sending soldiers, North Korea has also supplied Russia with military equipment. However, the appearance of this equipment on the battlefield has been extremely rare. But this time, Ukrainian first-person view drone operators managed to destroy a truly rare specimen, a North Korean multiple rocket launcher system M. 1991. The Russians didn't even really try to hide. They just drove up behind the nearest destroyed building. The drone operator carefully and slowly approached the multiple launch rocket system from behind and struck directly at the ammunition depot. The strike triggered the launch of one of the rockets, which flew out through the vehicle's windshield.
Who was there? Russians or Koreans? That's more of an academic question these days. As soon as Russian military equipment enters the drone zone, it turns into a charred pile of metal.
It seems they will need to use a different flexible printed circuit. It looks like they'll have to use another first-person view drone to finally finish off that lucky piece of equipment.
And now, when the barn doors in the United States are about to open because of the new aid, maybe this will make the Russians strive for peace or risk getting stuck in Ukraine for another good 10 years. I really hope that soon we'll hear that Russia wants negotiations. These will be tough negotiations and not very short ones, but let's hope for the best. Goodbye.